Okay, so we are in the latest in a series of conversations that I, Valerie Worthington, have had the opportunity to have with friends and colleagues and teachers of mine in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And the inspiration behind these conversations was the fact that we can't spend time together doing what we normally do, which is training and talking about Jiu-Jitsu. So I might as well have the opportunity, if I can, to connect with these friends and teachers and colleagues around things that they have expertise in besides jujitsu. So today I'm very, very happy to talk to my old friend, John Jensen, the Rev. And we're going to talk today about how people might be able to look to spiritual texts for comfort in times of uncertainty. But first, I want to say, hi, Rev. Thanks so much for meeting with me, talking with me. And the first thing that's interesting about you is that you have such a long and storied martial arts career. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit about your jiu-jitsu and your mixed martial arts journey and where you are now.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure always to talk to you. I find you a very encouraging person, yeah, every time I talk to you, I wind up feeling a little bit challenged and a lot happier. So yeah, it's great. It's great to have this opportunity. As far as my martial arts journey, it really started my freshman year in high school, when it was Hell Week in football, and it was horrible. We were doing 2-a-days in 100-degree weather. And because I lived far away from the Catholic high school that I was going to, we would just go across the street. We called it the plunge. I don't know what you call it back east, but it's just the public swimming pool. And we would go there and just soak while we're trying to recover from these horrible practices. And one of the guys said, if you think this is bad, in wrestling, every day is like this. And so for me, I just took that as a challenge. I immediately went, yeah, well, I could do it. And so I signed up for wrestling when football was over. I think he exaggerated a little bit. Wrestling practice was really hard, but it wasn't as hard as 2-a-days every day. Some days were, but not every day. And so I started wrestling, and my freshman year, I got pinned every match. And I wrestled freshman and junior varsity, and I got pinned every match. So I was really bad. And I was 5'4", and I weighed 112 pounds. And so I decided not to play football anymore because I liked playing line. I liked being one of the big boys in the middle. And it was obvious that I was just too small. Although I played line against those big 200-pounders, and I did fairly well, but it's just like, look, I want to be really good, and unless I'm 250 pounds, I'm not going to be able to do that. And at 114 pounds, that wasn't looking too good. So I quit football and I stayed in wrestling. And then my sophomore year, I actually made the varsity team, and I won 7 matches in varsity. So I try to tell my students all the time, look, you just have to work really hard and keep doing something. I wasn't naturally good at wrestling, but I worked my butt off to the point where I took 3rd in county, and Riverside County is a big county. I believe wrestling was my first martial art. People are starting to understand that wrestling is not only a martial art, it may be the most important martial art because of its effect on a fight, right? If I can't get the fight to the ground, my black belt in jiu-jitsu doesn't matter. And if I'm a kickboxer and I can't keep the fight on my feet, then my kickboxing doesn't matter. And so wrestling becomes the transitional art. So I started that in high school, and then I was a wrestling coach for a while. And then I saw the first one that I saw was UFC 3, where Royce got beat up really bad by chemo and still won, but then he didn't come out for the next fight. And I was just like, holy crap, this jiu-jitsu is like wrestling on steroids. So I found a gym nearby and I started training. You know, I didn't train a lot at first, just 7-8 times a week. And I tend to be obsessive about things. I got my blue belt in 6 months. When you start with a wrestling background, it kind of eases your way into things. And yeah, and then from then on, I think a year and a half of training jiu-jitsu, and I started wanting to fight MMA. So I started learning some kickboxing, mostly from a Muay Thai background. And then we were lucky enough to have Dwayne Ludwig come. He wanted to work on his jiu-jitsu, and we obviously were excited to have someone of his ability teach us some stand-up. And so yeah, so I've been doing that since then, and it's been almost 24 years of jiu-jitsu and stuff. And then with the wrestling, you know, you add my wrestling time onto that, it's 30 years of martial arts. So and I still wrestle, you know, I still do jiu-jitsu. I haven't sparred kickboxing in a long time, but that's because I'm smart and I don't like getting punched in the face.
Neither do I. And Muay Thai was actually my gateway martial art, but I hated getting kicked and punched. It's really fun to
Yeah.
kick and punch other people, but not so much to have that, you know, back at you. So you run a school in Ojai, California, correct?
Yes, yes. My gym is called Ojai Valley MMA. I probably made a mistake naming it Ojai Valley MMA because Ojai has a long tradition of a long mystical tradition that would be very much in the kind of new age, and so they are very embracing of nonviolence, and which I actually am too, at least theoretically. I'm not very good at it in real life, but theoretically, I believe in nonviolence. And so when they think MMA, they think of cage fighting. And it's been a struggle to kind of re-educate the people in the Valley that, look, yes, the UFC wasn't MMA. The UFC was no holds barred, you know, and people don't understand that they used MMA as a way to make them sound better, you know, where MMA, it's a concept that Bruce Lee talked about a lot. It was just taking pieces of everything and putting them together to make something uniquely your own. And that's what we're trying to do here. So I've been trying to get people to understand that. A lot of people are still like, I don't want to turn my kid into a violent monster. And they're like, you know what? The truth is you put your kid in a martial art, and more times than not, they're going to become less violent because fear tends to fuel our violence. And when you're not afraid, it's a lot easier to let things go, you know? So, but we love the area. It's just beautiful. There's a number of clubs that are in Ventura and Camarillo that are close by that have welcomed me to go train there if I want to go train with some other black belts. And so yeah, it's just a great, I just love it out here, and I love the people. And you know, my first gym that I started with Javier Vasquez and Romy Aram was a professional fighters gym. And so we had 18 pro fighters. We made no money. It was constant drama. What people don't understand, and I know people are going to get mad at me for saying this, but fighters can tend to be self-absorbed. And I don't say that as an insult. If you're going to go in and risk your life, you have to be self-absorbed. Your own training has to come first. But when you've got 18 people that are thinking of themselves first, it's just yeah, it was crazy. And normal people don't want to be around, you know, getting your nose set and your face super glued back together. So it's hard to make money.
Yeah.
And
So you know what's interesting is you said a couple things that are a good segue into another question that I had for you, which is you said that Bruce Lee talked about mixed martial arts as taking pieces and parts to make something uniquely your own. You also mentioned that you're in an area that is pacifistic, and another super interesting facet about you and a fundamental part of your identity is your Christianity. And
right.
so I was wondering if you would say a little bit about that journey, and then maybe if you can talk about how, in your mind, your jiu-jitsu identity or your martial arts identity and your spiritual identity connect with one another.
Well, yeah, it's difficult sometimes. I didn't start off a pacifistic Christian at all. When I became a Christian, I was very much what would be considered a typical evangelical. I believed in violence. I thought it was efficacious, and especially in dealing with bad people, right? Now, that's not unusual. We grow up watching cartoons that teach us that the only way to deal with bad men is through violence. You know, Popeye taught us that. The Teenage Mutant Ninjas taught us that. So I grew up in that culture, and I believe that. And as a Christian, with there's a official theology that says that violence is justified in certain situations, the just war theory, right? So that's where I came from. And when I started jiu-jitsu, that I was there. It wasn't until later that I began to question that. And then I had to make some decisions on, okay, how do I go forward with this? And I remember talking about it was like a hippy dippy Christian thing that I was one of the speakers at, and I got assaulted afterwards by this white chick with dreadlocks who really thought it was inappropriate that I could do MMA and still call myself a Christian, and particularly a pacifist. And it was funny because I told her, it was like, look, you know, you call yourself a Christian and you're judging me, and Jesus said that we're not supposed to judge people. And she goes, I'm not judging you. And I go, you most certainly are judging me. And she said, well, I don't mean to. And I said, okay, well, that's fair enough, but that's what you're doing. And you should just accept that, okay, we don't always live up to what we want, and we all have our own hypocrisies, and that's okay. But to answer your question, do you see anything wrong with skateboarding? And she looked at me like I was nuts. And I was like, just follow me for a second. Is there anything wrong with skateboarding? And she said, no. And I said, okay, but you do realize that when you skateboard, you get injured more often than you do in MMA. Is that, but that's okay, right? And she goes, yeah. And I said, okay, now this is what you need to understand. In MMA, it's very similar to skateboarding. You see, when I'm skateboarding, I would not have any fun unless the risk of injury was there. So when I hit that lip on a ramp and I'm out there. When I come down, if I land, that's the coolest thing in the world, but it's only the coolest thing in the world because if I don't land it, I'm going to smash my head into the wood, right? And that thrill is why I enjoy it. Well, in MMA, it's very, very similar. The only difference is I have an opponent, and that opponent has made a good faith gesture towards me to be the concrete. And I have done the same for him. So we are the concrete for each other. This isn't about violence. If I felt like I was angry at the person I was going to fight, I wouldn't fight them. And so she didn't accept that as a valid answer, but I think it's a pretty good answer. And that's how I deal with my idea, because the truth in my mind is that Jesus not only is about nonviolence, but he calls us into a life of nonviolence. Now, how far does that go? Well, theoretically, I think it goes farther than I'm comfortable with. In real life, if you lay a hand on my wife, or if someone even laid a hand on you, Val, yeah, I'd fuck them up. And I would feel guilty afterwards because there was probably a better response. But I'm very violent at the core of who I am, and it's something that I think I'm learning to deal with as a Christian and a follower of Jesus. So
what I appreciate so much is your candor, because it occurs to me that all of us have the tendency and the capability for violence, right? And all of us have the tendency and the capability for pacifism, and the two reside side by side. And it seems to me that the only difference is that maybe you explore those ideas and that dichotomy more often than the typical person.
maybe I do like what you're saying. It does sound very yin and yang, doesn't it? Right? And I think that's very true. A lot of Christians don't like to see truths in other religions, but man, they're there. The black and the white are always there, right? And it's not an issue of me going to war against the white, or I try to frame the white as the evil thing on occasion, just to even things out. Going to war against that doesn't do anything, because if anything, I become more focused on that which I'm trying to live without. It's recognizing these are both a part of who I am, and how can I learn to function in the world more and more with grace and love as the outcome, and less as my own selfishness, So
another beautiful segue. One of the things that I was hoping to learn from you when I reached out and you agreed to chat with me was, we're in arguably a time of crisis, right?
yeah,
Individually, we're dealing with that crisis in our own way. Globally, I think we're dealing with the crisis. So there are different sort of units of analysis here. And of course, this isn't the first crisis the world has seen. Unfortunately, it won't be the last. And throughout history, people have turned to spiritual texts. They've turned to spiritual scholars for comfort and for insight and wisdom. And when I thought about that and what could be potentially helpful to people who might be struggling with these kinds of issues, you were the first person I thought of. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you've used the thoughts and the texts to comfort you, to help you comfort people in your ministry, and what that looks like in this day and age, with what we're experiencing right now.
You told me you were going to ask this question, and I've been thinking about it for over a week now, and it's difficult because something happened along the way in my spiritual journey where I no longer see the Christian texts as something that bring a lot of peace and comfort. okay? And it's not, I mean, I'm not talking about wrestling with the absolute horrible passages like, where they were supposed to kill every man, woman, and child in the village. I'm not talking about those. Those have been really hard to deal with for a long time. I'm talking about just like everything in the life of Jesus in particular, because somewhere along the line, I was woken up to the realization that Jesus was hated by religious people. They hated him. Jesus was executed for treason. He was no nationalist. Jesus spent almost all of his time with the poor and the marginalized and the sinners and the diseased, and you could, as you start delving into the story, the actual story, without any of the commentary that tells you why the story actually doesn't matter, which is sad that that's become the commentary. Jesus's life upsets me a lot more than gives me comfort. It disrupts my life, and it makes, one of my friends said, Jesus ruined my life. And in a lot of ways, if you really wrestle with who Jesus is, he should ruin your life, okay? He didn't make things better for the disciples. They all got murdered, So that's the thing. It's like, what's really going on when you read the text? So on one level, and I hope you can understand, I wrestle with the question, because from the spiritual text that I read, I don't get that comfort that I used to get, right? However, I do get a different kind of comfort, and I think it's a lot more real. It's a lot deeper, okay? And this is what I mean. As I've woken up to this idea of the Bible being a series of texts written by a whole bunch of different men that had different goals when they wrote the passages that they wrote, and yet from cover to cover there seems to be this theme of anti-oppression, right? Some people call it liberation theology, right? So as I've begun to see things differently in that, now when I read the Bible, it causes me to ask, how do I interact with my world? And it's the interacting with my world from a less selfish place, interacting with my world from a more compassionate place, and sometimes interacting with my world from a very, what in Christian we call prophetic. In a lot of Christians, because they're not supposed to say asshole, they'll just say that you're very prophetic. What the idea is, the prophets are people like Martin Luther King that stand up against the powers that be and say what you're doing is wrong, okay? And that means that as I interact with my world, sometimes it's by sitting in the park every Sunday and having breakfast with the homeless people that live there, right? Sometimes it's taking in someone who's homeless, or a teenager that's pregnant or whatever, and letting them live with us. As you interact with the world on those levels, you find comfort that is very amazing. It's very important. And it's far deeper than the Jesus is my boyfriend comfort that I used to find, right? But sometimes it's standing up and yelling at the powers that be, you are crushing people and you need to stop. And as you do that, I mean, who am I? No one's gonna give a shit what I say. I mean, I don't like the commander in chief right now, but I think, it's like you look at the media on the left, and they announced that Trump said that the epidemic was a hoax. He didn't say that. He said what the Democrats are doing by demonizing his actions was their new hoax. Well, what the media did was a lie too. It doesn't matter which side you're on there, everyone's lying. And for me to stand up and say, guys, stop listening to all the bullshit and realize that if we don't start taking care of each other and loving each other, we're going to destroy one another. So when I stand up and I say those kind of things, it can cost me clients, it can cause me problems, and it can stuff. So even now, looking at things in this different way, sometimes it's comfort and sometimes it's not comforting. In this particular situation, reacting the way we have reacted, which was my wife is the manager of a health and retirement. We didn't like the idea of us coming and going, so we moved in there to serve the people here and to keep them safe. Now, whenever they need something special from the store, they get meals made here, but sometimes they need something special from the store. I suit up, I go to the store, I make sure there's nobody else in there, and I do the shopping for them. And in that serving, I feel like I am, it's like not, the question isn't why did this happen? The question is, what is my response to this? And I think in the Christian scriptures, you can find the response should be, to me, if you're a real follower of Jesus, the response should be, how can I reach out and treat other people with the same love that I would show to my own family?
So what I hear you saying, it's interesting that when you were talking, what occurred to me was the question that I asked you was, how do you find comfort in spiritual texts, or what are some texts that you use? And what I hear you saying is that what those texts have taught you is that you have to be the comfort. You have to create that comfort for other people, and that is how you get comfort inside. Is that fair to say?
Except I took 10 minutes to say it. It seems like you just made me look like an idiot.
I didn't at all.
That's exactly the point. It's not, for me personally, okay? Now I'm not saying that I don't find comfort in a more, this story made me feel better. When I read the story of the resurrection, and you know what? I don't care if it's just all made up and it's a fairy tale. I don't care. The story is so beautiful that it really moves me and it makes me feel better. Okay? I guess what I'm trying to say is I learned that me feeling better when I read a text isn't the point of the text. The point of the text is me getting off my ass and doing something to make the world a better place, even if it's just in my own house. So if I couldn't help the people here, my wife is under more stress now than she has ever been in her whole life. So I cook dinner, I do the dishes, I try to keep the house clean. Well, I'm trying to make, like you said, I'm trying to be the comfort. And in the midst of that, well, gosh darn it, I feel really good about me, And when people say there's no such thing as true, what's the word, when you do nice things for people, with no hope, of, well, I can't remember the word, but a lot of people say altruism, okay? There's no real true altruism because everyone expects something, even if it's the way they feel afterwards. I would kind of be close to that way of thinking, but it doesn't matter because you only get the feelings after you do the thing that costs you something, right? So you have to step out in faith and do the thing first, and then afterwards, then you do feel better, and it's a beautiful thing. And I think that at least the way I look at Jesus in his life, he didn't say worship me, worship me, worship me, worship me. He sings songs about how I'm your boyfriend. What Jesus did is he said, hey, make this world heaven. May your kingdom come on earth and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Make this place heaven, right? And if you focus on that, if you focus on following the example that I'm giving you, instead of forming a new religion, it's like, why would you do that? The old religion hated him. So we make a new religion, and guess what? Everyone that's too much like him, they hate them too. You know, part of me, which is maybe not a great thing to do, but part of me, when the church gets mad at me, I think, yes, I'm like Jesus, right? But sometimes the church is mad at me because I'm just being an asshole, right? So it's, you know, but you always read things in your best favor, right? So at least I do.
Oh no, I do the same. And what I'm picking up here, Rev, is that it's just the act of being a good. Let me back up. One of the things that occurs to me as I hear you talking is there might be people listening who don't have a spiritual practice, and or who might be thinking to themselves, yeah, you know, I'd like to do something to make a positive contribution to the world, but I don't know how to start. So how do you inspire people to even take a small step toward being that comfort like we were talking about?
Um, well, believe it or not, I would start with what I would call prayer, what a lot of cultures would call meditation. Okay. And you don't even have to believe in God to do this, right? Now, a lot of what Christianity has turned prayer into is writing out a Christmas list to Santa, right? I don't really buy that, okay? So if you want to start someplace, what I would suggest is taking some time, preferably in the morning. You take 20 minutes. I like to light a candle, maybe burn a little bit of sage. I am in a Southern California hippie community, so you know I got to fit in a little bit. And then I just sit in silence, and I have a word or a phrase that can help bring my attention back to nothing. Okay, where's your attention supposed to be? It's supposed to be on nothing. So for me, the flame and the word help me to, when my mind starts drifting off to what I have to do today, I say the word, I look at the flame, and I go back. And you don't have to, look, this is my biggest problem. I'm competitive. So I'm trying to win at meditation. You don't win. You're never going to win at meditation. The goal is not to accomplish anything. The goal is to allow your mind to stop. Now, in my tradition, there's this passage where the prophet says that I didn't hear God's voice in the tornado. I didn't hear God's voice in the thunderstorms. I didn't see God in the lightning. Where I found God was in this still small voice in the silence, right? And so for me, it's just, my head just never shuts up. I think in the Buddhist tradition, they call it the monkey mind. I mean, for me, it's more like silverback mind, because it's just nonstop and it never, I can't scare it away. So I don't worry about the fact that I suck at this so bad. I just very gently say the word, look at the flame, and I begin again in the silence. And I try to hear the still small voice. Now, if you don't believe there is a still small voice, that's fine. There is something inside of you. There is good and compassion and joy and empathy and love in the heart of you. It doesn't matter who you are, it's there. And what that time of meditation does is it gives you an opportunity to get in contact with that. Now, once you get there, there's a lot of different books from all different traditions that can help you grow in areas of service and empathy and compassion and stuff like that. You know, one of the most fun books that I've read is a book called The Irresistible Revolution by a guy named Shane Claiborne. He's in Philadelphia, actually. And just a really neat guy. And he wrote a book that tells some stories about how he went from being a normal Christian to one of the guys like me. But he's such a neat guy. We brought him over to Australia when we were there. And in his rider, you know, whenever you're a speaker, you have a rider that you have all these requests and stuff like that. In his rider, it says that he doesn't believe that it's good to travel alone, and so that he turns down any speaking request that doesn't also bring a companion with him, so that, you know, it's not good for someone to be alone, especially when they're going to be in a situation where they get praised so much, right? So of course we make room in the budget for that, for sure. He brought his mom, Val. He brought his mother, and we took the two of them sightseeing in Australia, and it was just the most beautiful thing. This guy is the real deal, and he's so awesome. But The Irresistible Revolution, it's not the Bible, but it's just a beautiful text, and I think it would be great for anyone, whether they're Christian or not. Just a great, you know, I think that you can find some amazing stuff even in the atheist Nietzsche. He's got some stuff that really calls you to be more than you think you are, right? There's all kinds of stuff out there that can become a spiritual text. The issue isn't the reason it's written or whether it has a leather bound cover. The issue is, how do you respond to it, and does it call you to a deeper level of humanity? And in a crisis like this, we need real humans. That's what we need. You know?
We really do. We really do. And I so much of what you said is just beautiful and really resonating with me. And if I, again, you're gonna say that I'm making you look bad by trying to encapsulate, but I'm just trying to if I have you right, the way to comfort, or the way to, whether it's a spiritual comfort or just sort of a higher awareness, is to look inward and to look outward.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And my mentor, who weirdly enough lives next door to me, he said, Actually, I don't think he said it. I think someone else said it and he repeated it to me. It's like you have to read the Bible with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. And if your spiritual reflections are only like self-focused, you can get comfort, you can feel better, you can do a lot of things, but it's just kind of like the disease of America. It's just me, and we've modified religion and spirituality too. I think my tribe's done it better than all of the rest. We've made Christianity into a corporation, and we've made pastors as the CEOs, and the whole thing is just an absolute rubbish heap. And I hate it. But all of religion has done that. I think particularly the New Age movement has done a lot of that with Eastern texts and Eastern damn it. Anyways, the Eastern spirituality, they turned it into a product and sold it, you know. And I think that we tend to do that real easy whenever something makes us feel better. That's why I struggled with the question for so long that you were going to ask me, because I think that real religion should give you enough grace and enough comfort to go out and do uncomfortable things. And then when you fail, enough grace and enough comfort and enough forgiveness to help you get your ass out and do it again. And so far, my wife and I have been failing forward our whole life, and we've gotten to the place where we're now very comfortable losers. And I think it's okay. And I think that we're just a little bit better losers than we were before, you know?
I hope I'm right there with you. I hope I'm a comfortable loser and a little bit better at it too. So I love that way of wording it. So Rev, what if anything have I not asked you that you would like to share in terms of your experience with your spirituality, your ministry, particularly as it relates to what people are experiencing right now?
Well, if I can, because I haven't experienced Buddhist, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, those are the biggies. I'm sure there's a bunch of Zoroastrianism. What's the beautiful religion with the beards and the Sikhs? Oh, that's such a beautiful religion. And I know a lot about them and their stories, but I don't really know a lot about what worship actually is for them. But it does seem like in almost all of these settings, maybe with the exception of Buddhism, but even some of the Western Buddhism that I've seen is like this as well. Our spirituality kind of centers around mass gatherings, which would mean that those people that are people of faith and are Christians or whatever, they might be really struggling because of what they're missing right now from these gatherings, because you get a lot from that. So I guess what I would ask myself is, you know, Rev, when you're in a situation where can you still hear me with that going on? Okay. When you find yourself in a situation where one of the main ways that you practiced your spirituality and your worship is gone, what do? And my response is, man, this is an exciting opportunity to look into what it might mean to have a spirituality that is different and dynamic and not based on a 1 day a week gathering. I've never liked that idea. A lot of people, it seems like they hold on to the Sunday, makes me feel better and makes me feel convinced of my faith and makes the doubt get a little bit further away until Friday. And then Friday I go out and I get drunk and I do some things that I don't feel bad about, or I do feel bad about, and then Sunday I feel forgiven and clean and give me enough to get me through till next Friday. Or maybe you're not like that. Maybe you're a good practicing Muslim and you don't get drunk on Friday or whatever. You know, you say your prayers every day, you get through everything, but that gathering together with your family of faith, it creates this thing that allows you to get through the week. Well, what if during this time, what if maybe it could even be God's plan or the universe's plan or whatever to give us this curiosity, this creativity, or maybe a courage even. Did you notice 3 C's? Creativity, courage. Yeah, see? Maybe all of those things to creating a spirituality that is self-sustaining and not self-focused, and that can help us in a time where we need it, but also when this is over, give us a completely new ability to not only thrive, but to begin to help others as well. And so that's my big question is and I do ask myself this quite frequently, how can this bad thing be used for good in my life? And I think that this can be that. So
and maybe that focus on not being self-focused but being a little bit more inward focused, maybe that then can, when the quarantine is over, can come out into relationships with other people, so that that community that people share is transformed as well.
that's right. It's absolutely right. See, Jesus, they asked him, okay, so what is, if you had to narrow it all down, Jesus, right? Because you talk too much, just narrow it all down. Me and Jesus were a lot alike in that, right? We told too many stories. Jesus, narrow it all down. We just want to just give it to us in what's the most important thing? And he said, love God with your whole heart, mind, some of us forget that part, soul, and strength. And then he said, but the second one's important too. Love your neighbor as yourself. If you want to narrow down all of Jesus's teachings, that's it. Love God, love your neighbor. That's, I can remember 2, and I've been punched in the head a lot. So if I can remember 2, most people can remember 2. Love God, love your neighbor. Now this is the thing. When we realize that maybe I can't change the world like Martin Luther King Jr. did, right? But I can change the world on Prospect Street. I can even change the world a little bit in Oakview, where I live, right? If we think that way, then this inner work that we're doing allows us to do more than be, feeling good about ourselves, but it allows us to then reach out and help other people that may need a little help loving themselves too, So
it makes perfect sense, and that's a lot of food for thought there. My one last question for you, Rev, is what are you going to do? What are the first things you're going to do when the quarantine is over?
We're gonna start up our house church again, and have that well, we eat together, and then we meet in our living room and we talk. And I think that that's really important, because throughout most of our lives, our house church has been our avenue towards activism in our neighborhood. And so that Raquel's already doing a lot of activism with her work, and I feel like I do a lot in the gym, like just working with people there on a different level besides martial arts. But yeah, I think I want to get more involved with that, and having that. There's something about community that can exponentially allow you to touch your neighborhood, and I would like to do that as soon as this is over. So I'm taking steps towards getting there by doing some, like I'm going to start doing Zoom meetings on Sunday. So yeah.
That sounds beautiful. And if it's okay with you, I'll follow up to get that information so that people want to follow you on Sundays, they can join in. Would that be all right?
That would be absolutely great. But please, if you do join in, don't just be a purchaser. I mean, I'm not charging anything, but it's like, bring you to the table too. Speak up, say your own thing, because as we gather together and we all put in our own little something, it comes out beautiful. So yeah. Now, can I say something before we go?
Yes, you can.
For those of you that are watching, probably 3 or 4 years ago, I was going through a very, very difficult and dark time. And this woman took time out of her own life to talk with me and to encourage me and to help me deal with maybe the darkest time in my life. And so yeah, I think that even though you may not be a nun, you sure are a spiritual leader that I love and respect quite a lot. So thank you.
Thank you, Rev. I love you too, and I know you do the same for me. That's not what it's about, but it's about it's that community that you were talking about, and I'm so grateful to have you in mine and that I get to be in yours. So
yeah,
thank you very much.
Me
Rev,
too. And tell your neighbors you're still living with Annie and Rick.
I am.
Well, sorry, I cry a lot nowadays. You tell them that I love them too, and someday I'll get to Philadelphia and spend some time with you all.
So I'm going to hold you to that, and
Okay.
And I love you, Rev. And
get on Steve. Steve's got to bring me out for a seminar.
I will. So basically, I have my list of tasks once the quarantine is over, so I'm good. I will
add that one to it.
I will.
Okay.
John the Rev Jensen, thank you so much.
Absolutely welcome. Have a great day.
You too.